for tuning in today and joining us on another SpiceWorks Partner webinar. Red Rover, send that device over. Brought to you by Pulse Secure. Before we get started, I do want to remind everyone this webinar is being recorded. If you have to step away for any reason, you will get an email with a link to the video in about a week. Also, there's a Q&A box on your screen to the left, and I encourage you to submit your questions at any time during the presentation. We'll get to those questions at the end via verbal Q&A, but if your question isn't addressed live, someone will be able to follow up with you. We've also got a live chat going, so make sure you click on that widget at the bottom of your screen to join us in that. Now I'd like to introduce our presenter, Lisa Lorenzin, Principal Solutions Architect. So Lisa, whenever you're ready, take it away.
Thanks, Emily. It's great to join you today. I'm here to talk about Pulse Policy Secure, which is part of our Secure Access portfolio. It is a NAC solution that is designed to address some of the major customer challenges that we see in the enterprise. So when we talk with customers, the biggest problems that they're facing today mostly revolve around people and phones. And let me tell you, I am the poster child for this because I do 80% of my email these days on my rooted Android phone that I also use to watch cat videos and click on all sorts of links. So don't do what I do. But how does Pulse Secure and other companies like it enable users like me to securely access internal resources from our personal devices as well as better controlled, more manageable corporate devices so that we can work 24/7 and be incredibly productive? That's the first challenge. The second challenge is how do you ensure compliance across the range of devices, from personal to corporate, from employee to contractor to guest, etc. With email, it's not that difficult because there's often a layer of security that will protect me from myself. There's only so much damage I can do. But with applications and with full VPN tunnels, there really needs to be a better and smarter way to protect the data at rest on my device, protect the data in transit as it goes back and forth between companies. Pulse Policy Secure is designed to address those challenges. So the first thing about any security problem is understanding the scope of the problem. We offer comprehensive visibility, and that's the foundation for creating a security policy for understanding who is accessing what resources from what locations, using what platforms, in what compliance state. Once you have visibility, then you're able to ensure secure access, and you're also able to provide reporting and make sure that you are able to comply with whatever regulatory frameworks might be applicable. So the second foundation then is policy. If you have the ability to understand who the user is, where they're coming from, then what device they're using. Then you have the ability to control what resources they might access, the variety of different types of locations and resources that they may be connecting from and to. And then the issue with BYOD devices starts with how do you get them onto the network securely? How do you understand what devices are coming into the network? How do you determine whether they're operated by an employee or a guest? If it is an employee with a BYOD device, how do you make sure that they are connecting to the appropriate resources for that platform versus with whatever types of corporate devices that might be better controlled? So all of these are a bunch of moving parts, and the major goal for the administrator as well as for the user is simplicity. We need a way to make this manageable, and we need a way to make it seamless and transparent for the end user. The Policy Secure solution actually has its origins in Pulse Secure's industry-leading SSL VPN. Our SSL VPN solution came into being as Neoterrace, if any of you guys go back that far. We have both physical and virtual appliances, and it's designed to allow secure remote access for a variety of use cases, from employees on home PCs or mobile devices or corporate laptops to contractors and business partners accessing resources that are in a DMZ. The goal with Connect Secure was and remains to provide granular role-based access control, taking into account the user identity and role, what type of device they're on, the compliance state of their device, and what types of resources they need to access. So we had customers come to us and say, we'd like to take this granular, extensive, comprehensive control and access, and we'd like to point it at our internal users. Can we just take the SSL VPN and flip it around and drop it into our internal network? And unfortunately, you really can't do that because internal enterprise on-premise access has two challenges that you don't get with remote access. Number one, remote access is a single point of ingress. So it's a logical place to put an inline device, and you have control over all of the connections into your environment. And number two, those inbound connections are often extremely low bandwidth. If I'm coming in over the cellular network or, cable modem, DSL, etc., those speeds are slowly getting faster, but there's still nothing compared to what you see on campus in the enterprise today. So we needed a way to meet this need, but we couldn't just take the existing technology and flip it around. So we thought about what we were really doing in Connect Secure in the SSL VPN. And it really breaks down into two pieces, policy and enforcement. So that's what we split it into. The policy component is the Pulse Policy Secure server itself. And this can run as a hardware appliance or it can run as a virtual appliance. It does the authentication, the authorization, the role mapping, and it provisions out policy to the enforcement points. So we can go against backend AAA, such as Active Directory, LDAP, PKI, two-factor authentication. There's a variety of backend data stores that we integrate with to authenticate and authorize the user, as well as the granular role-based health checks that we can perform on the platform itself. Once we know who you are, what your platform is, whether that platform is compliant with whatever requirements, possibly what location you're coming from, then the question is, how do we provide enforcement? And the first phase that we approached was obvious because Neoterras was purchased by NetScreen, which was a firewall company. So we have all these fast, intelligent firewalls doing stateful inspection. Let's make them even more intelligent and enable them to do identity-enabled stateful inspection. So we used the NetScreen ScreenOS firewalls and later on the Juniper SRX firewalls as our first enforcement points for Policy Secure. This allows us to do layer 3 network segmentation inside the network, placing an enforcement point between the originating end user and the resources that they're trying to access. Once we have the firewall enforcement in place, then the next option is protecting at the edge of the network. We had customers come to us and say, it's great that we have the ability to protect the data center and the resources in the data center, but we also want to be able to protect the network itself and control who is admitted to the network. So at that point, Juniper purchased Funk Software, and Funk Software brought us steel-belted Radius, which is the industry-leading carrier-grade Radius server, and it also brought us the Odyssey Access Client, which is a Windows 802.1x supplicant to make up for the fact that the 802.1x supplicant in Windows XP and Vista, it was there, but it wasn't very flexible, and it certainly wasn't very configurable. So this allowed us to do 802.1x and Radius to any enterprise switch, any enterprise wireless vendor. We also worked to enable particular integration for guest access with Aruba and Cisco wireless LAN controllers to integrate with the Captain Portal capabilities in those components. And as we've moved forward, our ecosystem is expanding. Now that Pulse Secure has been spun out of Juniper, we have the option of partnering with additional firewall companies. So we've just announced an integration with Palo Alto Networks with their industry-leading next-generation firewalls. And we're also working on expanding our ecosystem to additional custom development with other switch wireless vendors and with other firewall vendors. So now that we have enforcement, the next step is when you push admission control out to the edge, you really have to understand how everything gets onto the network. And that includes both devices that can do 802.1x and the dark matter of your enterprise. Printers, voice over IP phones, IP-enabled security cameras, IP-enabled kiosks. There needs to be a way to dynamically discover and classify those devices so that we can extend a similar level of authorization to them that we do to managed endpoints with 802.1x. And we integrate with various profiling solutions to allow the discovery and classification of endpoints to enable us to authorize them onto the network. Once you've let everybody onto the network and you know where they're going, then the question becomes, how do you see what people are doing? So we have custom integrations with companies such as Juniper's STRM and IBM's QRadar SIM that will allow not only extensive correlation and reporting, but it will also allow us to consume information from those vendors. So behavior can become an additional part of the context we apply to access control decisions. The profiling solutions as well as the SIM solutions from these vendors can signal back to the policy server. We do that using an open standard called IFMAP, and there are a few other vendors that have also implemented this open standard so that we can consume data from other devices in the network related to endpoint behavior, and that enables us to apply dynamic modifications to access even when the endpoint's compliance state hasn't changed if the behavior we're seeing in the network isn't up to snuff. This same integration with IFMAP also allows us to extend seamless single sign-on across both SSL VPN and internal NAC connections. So if you have a campus user connecting through a firewall enforcement point to get access to resources, they have a seamless user experience where they're already authenticated to the policy server and their traffic is permitted based on their role. If you have a remote access user coming in, we wanted to extend the same seamless experience, and we do that by something we call session federation, using the same security automation standard. And of course, the biggest change in the last 5 to 10 years of enterprise computing has been the advent of mobile devices. Phones, tablets, netbooks. Laptops really started this trend, but the mobile operating systems like iOS and Android carried it to a new level. Everybody wants to be able to work from their tablet. I've tried to do web meetings from my phone. It's really not a good experience. But on a 7-inch tablet or even a 10-inch tablet, you have the ability to really use that almost as a replacement for a full desktop or a laptop in some ways. And if we want to allow these devices to participate fully in the network, then we need to be able to interrogate them to determine whether they're managed and to do some level of device classification on them the same way that we do on desktop components. For that, we've introduced integration with industry-leading MDM solutions from MobileIron and AirWatch. So you have the ability to identify managed devices, to determine whether they're compliant, to check other classifying details about the platform. So this looks like a really complex diagram. And to be honest, I don't think I have any customers that are using 100% of these features. What this is, it represents a toolbox. If there's a particular problem you're trying to solve, different tools in this toolbox are appropriate to different problems. So for example, if you're trying to do secure guest access, then the integration with Cisco, Aruba Wireless, our ongoing conversations with additional parties, that allows you to extend to onboarding and secure access to guests and to BYOD devices. Whereas if your concern is regulatory compliance, you need to protect PCI data or data that's protected under HIPAA, then you might want to do firewall enforcement. So what we often see is when we identify the problems that the enterprise needs to solve, then we can prioritize those based on the severity of the problem and the ease of addressing it and come up with a phased approach to say, okay, in this environment with this set of problems, it makes sense to start with 802.1x. Down the road, at another customer, it might make sense to start with firewall enforcement. In some places, we may need MDM integration. In other places, that may not be an issue. So this represents a flexible, mature solution that allows you to tackle a variety of different enterprise challenges. So when we drill a little deeper into the benefits of a solution, the first one is visibility. Understanding your environment is critical to building a set of security policies. You want to be able to know who is connecting into your network and through your network, what resources they're accessing, what platforms they're coming from, what the compliance state could be of those platforms, what their behavior is throughout the network, and really just how they're using the resources that are available to them. Typical enterprise visibility solutions such as SIEMs give you a lot of data about what IP addresses are going where. A solution such as Policy Secure adds the human layer to that data. So you can identify for a particular user every way they connect to the network, or every resource they access to the network. If there's a device that you need to investigate, you can identify how that device entered the network, what compliance state it was in when it entered the network. So this allows you to respond to audits, to demonstrate thoroughly that, for example, the only users, the only roles that connected into a segment containing PCI data were in roles that were appropriate to accessing that data. And it also allows you to detect and investigate security incidents by understanding who is connecting where and being able to put all the pieces together to identify the full profile of what they did in the network. The next step is extending that to secure mobility. And that there's really two different aspects of mobility. One is the mobile worker like me, who may be in a hotel, in a conference room, in an airport. And the second is the worker on a mobile device, who may be, again, connecting in through a VPN or connecting through the campus network and wants the same level of access that you would get on a desktop or a laptop, maybe needs access from a personal device. And so you have to decide what access you want to extend to BYOD devices as well as to corporate devices. So the goal here is to be able to create a comprehensive policy that will follow the user, and it will be clearly understood where they can go from a personal device, where they can go from a corporate device, whether there are any differences in what they can access remotely versus what they can access on-premise. Regulatory compliance is one of the biggest drivers for installing and maintaining a MAC solution. Policy Secure offers a set of capabilities that help to meet both the regulations themselves and the requirement to pass the audit proving you're meeting those regulations. So we give the ability to prevent unauthorized access to the network itself and the resources in the network. For compliance, you can dynamically assess the state of the devices, both at admission and for the duration of their session. And if a device becomes uncompliant or is uncompliant when it connects, there are multiple options, from an automatic remediation, where the problem is just resolved for the user, to a manual remediation, where the user is given instructions and allowed to remediate their own issue, to denying them access to the network and informing them what they need to do to reconnect. This allows you to protect the network against devices that might be compromised in some way. And it also ties into the context-aware policies. So Policy Secure enables the creation and enforcement of consistent cross-platform, cross-network access policies. You have to be compliant whether you're coming in a VPN or the on-premise network. You might have a set of compliance policies for managed devices, as well as a set for BYOD devices, and there may be a set of resources that are accessible from managed devices that are perhaps not accessible from BYOD because of the sensitivity of the data. You also have the ability to apply strong government-approved encryption to the connections within your network as well as the remote access connections. All of these aspects go to comprehensive, context-based secure access. Users are allowed to access the resources that are appropriate to their identity, their role, their platform, their compliance state, and this policy can be applied regardless of how they're connecting to those resources, wired or wireless, off-premise or on-premise, personal or corporate devices. So to illustrate what this looks like in the real world, we have a set of usage scenarios that represent the most common deployments that we see for Policy Secure. The first one is, well, they're both predicated on the two enforcement modes that are available, 802.1x and Radius for Layer 2 admission control, or firewall-based enforcement for Layer 3 network segmentation. So the first of these use cases is the basic enterprise access control enforcement. Let's say you have a local user who comes into the network with an uncompliant device. I used to work for Blue Cross Blue Shield, and we would see this fairly frequently, that a nurse or some other home worker with a laptop would go on vacation. They would drop their laptop in a drawer, and then when they got back from a couple weeks of vacation, they would bring the device into the network, and it would be out of date on the antivirus or out of date on the patches. So they connect an uncompliant device to the network. And the Policy Secure assessment identifies that the device is out of compliance. So we have the ability to send instructions to the switch or wireless controller that they're connected to quarantine that device. And what quarantine means may really change depending on the requirements of the enterprise. In some environments, you may actually give full access to the network, but require that the device update in the background. In other networks, there may be a limited access that only allows connections to the patch server or the antivirus database. And in other networks, they may be sensitive enough that access will be denied, and the user actually has to take that device to a different network to remediate. So there's a lot of flexibility in how that remediation can happen, whether it's done inline while the user is productive, whether it's done in a quarantine environment, or for people like guests or more transient populations, you may just deny access to the network entirely if the device is uncompliant. So whatever path is taken to get to remediation, once the remediation is successful and the endpoint passes the evaluation, then all of the privileges that normally attend that user's access can be given to them. So we can push down to switches and wireless devices various Radius attributes such as standard VLAN IDs. We can invoke an ACL that already exists on the device, or we can even push down dynamic ACLs. We can do other vendor-specific attributes such as QoS for special purposes. So we have full flexibility in the Radius attributes that we can provision to switches and wireless environments. We also have the ability to enable the role-based policy enforcement on the firewalls by pushing user session information out to Juniper's or Palo Alto's next-generation firewalls. So you have that identity-enabled access both at the edge of the network and deeper in the network. And once the user is connected, then the policy server is still controlling what they're allowed to access, what VLAN they're placed in, what resource policies are invoked in the Juniper firewalls. So if they attempt to access inappropriate data, their access will still be denied. So this is the high-level overview of a standard access control deployment. And again, this isn't always implemented as a single phase. Generally, an enterprise will look at what problem they're trying to solve. They'll say, okay, we need to protect data in our data center, so we're going to use an existing firewall, or we're going to add a firewall enforcer to do intelligent identity-enabled network segmentation. And then down the road, once they've mitigated the immediate risk, they may consider extending that to admission control. Or an enterprise may say, hey, we want to control our wireless networks first to allow guest access to certain aspects of the network, contractor access to different aspects, and then full access to employees. Then we want to extend this to the wired network. And maybe further down the road, we want to do network segmentation, but maybe not. We've already also talked about the challenge of unmanaged device access, where you've got a variety of devices such as printers, voice-over IP phones, IP security cameras, kiosks, and the whole Internet of Things. IP addresses on light bulbs. It's getting crazy out there. So what we need is a way to profile those devices and identify by the MAC address what we think they are. So some form of profiling solution does device discovery and does initial classification so that when the device connects to the network, the switch or the wireless that they're connecting to can send a radius request based on the MAC address itself, since there is no 802.1 itself. Policy Secure can look up that MAC address in the profiler, and as long as that device has been discovered and classified, we can use the attributes from the profiler to assign that device to a role and provision access for that device the same way that we would for a user logging in with identity at layer 3 or at layer 2 via 802.1. The big challenge, though, with a MAC-based radius authentication is MAC spoofing. It's extremely simple for an attacker to walk into the network, look at the bottom of the printer. The MAC address is usually on a sticker on the bottom of the device. So if I clone that onto a netbook or a laptop, and I start mapping the network, how can the system respond? This is where additional security automation comes in. The profiler, if it can detect the behavior change, either by consuming net flow or possibly a port mirror for traffic, it finds some way to identify that the behavior from that MAC address on the endpoint no longer matches the original profile, and it can reclassify the device into the new profile. It can also use that IFMAP security automation to signal that this behavior has changed and that that device needs to be reevaluated. So Policy Secure can then use radius change of authorization to control the access for that device based on a reevaluation. So we can consume the updates of the profiler, reevaluate the profile at the endpoint, assign it to a new role, and then push down more restrictive access control policies or even deny it on the network entirely. We also talked about the desire for seamless single sign-on for both remote access and on-premise users. And this is where enterprise-wide access control comes in. So let's say now, instead of coming into the office, our user who's been on vacation logs into the SSL VPN instead. So they connect to the VPN with an unpatched device. And again, they go through whatever type of remediation is required. The SSL VPN finally determines that they are in compliance and grants access and then sets up a VPN tunnel. At this point, the VPN publishes user session information to a federation server. And so the federation server is basically a clearinghouse for user session data across all of the policy devices in the network, whether they're the SSL VPN gateways or the Policy Secure NAC policy servers. When the user tries to send traffic through the environment, that traffic will hit the firewall. And this integration is currently today specific to the Juniper firewall. So the traffic hits the firewall, and the firewall looks up the user traffic that is not authenticated yet. There's no active user session on the policy server, but the policy server is able to query the federation server and obtain the user session data that was published by the VPN. So all of this happens within the space of 1 or 2 panes of background. Policy server pushes down user session data to the firewall itself. And at that point, the firewall is able to allow or deny access based on the role. In this case, though, instead of reinventing the wheel and forcing the user to sign in twice, both to the SSL VPN and to the policy server, we're able to leverage the authentication and authorization process that happened on the Connect Secure SSL VPN gateway, and we consume that in Policy Secure to enable that user's access seamlessly through the network enforcement points on firewalls. So we talked a little bit about the desire to do behavioral-based access modification. And that applies not only to unmanaged devices, but it can actually apply to any device in the enterprise. So let's say an infrastructure device is connected to the network, and this could be a phone, a printer. It could also be an authorized user on a compliance endpoint. And that device is connected to the network, but they engage in some kind of unauthorized activity. whether this is unauthorized behavior from a well-known endpoint or whether it's the kind of spoofing that we discussed before. So when that happens, some sensor deeper in the network, this could be the profiler use case that we talked about before, but it could also be NIM such as Juniper STRM or IBM QRadar, or it could even be an IPS component on the Juniper SRX firewall. Whatever sensor out there detects the unauthorized behavior, that sensor is again able to signal to the policy server to say, you know that MAC address or that IP address that you're authorizing? You may want to know that they're doing something we don't approve of. So Policy Secure consumes that information and correlates it with an authenticated user session. And we're able to apply different actions based on the role of the endpoint in question. So there may be some sensitive devices. This could be medical imaging systems or highly available resources in a manufacturing environment. There may be some devices that no matter what happens, the risk of taking them offline is higher than any threat that could be posed by spoofing. So in that case, you may want to log an alert on this behavior, but not take any action through the policy server. That's the lowest form of response, the least impactful form of response. The next step up would be to just disconnect the user's session. And in that case, the endpoint will be reevaluated, and it may be allowed back on the network if it was just a transient behavior, or it may be placed into a new role and quarantined if it was a change of profile of the device itself. A third option would be to dynamically change the role rather than reevaluating, just to assume that we want to automatically quarantine or restrict its access. And the fourth option, the nuclear option, would be to actually disable that endpoint on the network until an administrator has an option to step in and take a look. You're really unlikely to do that with anything important, but if it's a printer in a conference room, it may be good to boot it from the network entirely until somebody can figure out what's going on. So there's a variety of response choices, and based on those actions, Policy Secure, again, will provision appropriate policy to the switches, the wireless, the firewalls to modify or to deny the access to that device environment. Policy Secure offers a variety of differentiators from other NAC solutions that are out there today. The first is that we're built on proven open technology. We go all the way back to the Neoterras SSL VPN, the best-of-breed firewalls from Juniper Networks and now from Palo Alto, our integrations with Cisco and Aruba Wireless for captive portal integration, and the open standards that we use, such as IFMAP and 802.1x, for provisioning and sharing security information. The second differentiator is the context-aware policy enforcement in all the different areas that you need to control and provide secure access. Wired and wireless, at admission and deeper in the network, desktop and mobile platforms, and even the integration with remote and on-premise users. The third differentiator is the one-stop solution for NAC and BYOD. The ability to easily onboard BYOD devices, the ability to offer guest self-registration, or employee sponsorship for guests. So these three differentiators, they are the sum of our advantages. And other NAC solutions out there will offer one or two of these benefits, but no other NAC solution offers them across the board the way that Policy Secure does. So our solution is really designed to offer automation, simplicity for end-to-end deployment, unified policy, and proven technology. We start with a strong focus on security from our foundation in the Neoterras SSL VPN, the Juniper firewalls, the Funk software integration with 802.1x and Radius. These have been deployed in some cases for decades in customer environments, securing mission-critical infrastructure. We've added onto that the ability to do automated onboarding, automated incident response based on information provided to us by the device or the user, as well as information that we can consume from other elements of the network. It's an end-to-end security solution applied to both BYOD and corporate devices and allowing seamless mobility between on-premise and off-premise, between wired and wireless. different aspects of the network. The integration with MDM allows us to extend this to mobile devices as well as to traditional desktop OSs. All of these components combine for a comprehensive policy that can be applied across VPN and MAC and gives secure access across a variety of contexts for the user. So that's a lot of words in a very short time. I'm sure that there may be some questions out there. Emily, do you have anything for me?
Absolutely. Let's go ahead and get some of these questions answered. Ben would like to know, does it integrate with Active Directory at all?
Yes, absolutely. So we're able to use Active Directory as the backend data store, and we are able to make role mapping decisions based on Active Directory groups. So you can authenticate the user against Active Directory, then consume the group membership from Active Directory and use that as one of the inputs into a role. Not only that, but this is interoperable with and can coexist with the health checking that we can do. So you can say, if your Active Directory group is a privileged user, maybe we want to apply a higher level of compliance check. If your Active Directory group is a normal user, maybe there's a different set of compliance checks that we want to apply to those users. So we do have full integration with Active Directory.
Great. Let's see. Brian, oh wait, hold on. Here's another question. How compatible is Pulse Policy Secure solution with existing infrastructure, especially firewalls and switches?
So those are two different questions. The first question is the firewalls. In the case of firewalls, there is no unifying industry standard. So we rely on custom integrations with third-party firewalls through APIs and custom interfaces. So we currently have full integration with Juniper SRX firewalls. We also have integration with Palo Alto Networks firewalls. We are in conversation with other leading firewall vendors to extend this ecosystem, and we expect to announce integrations with one and possibly two, if we hit our stretch goals, of the other firewall vendors in 2016. On the switch and wireless side, it's simpler because 802.1x is a common standard, 802.1x and Radius, that switches can use to authenticate end devices against our policy server. So we have full 802.1x and Radius integration with any major switch or wireless vendor that implements those standards. In addition, we expect to introduce in 2016 a simpler method of switch integration, which is SNMP-based enforcement. We avoided this for a long time because SNMP is really a network management protocol rather than a security protocol. And while it was lacking in basic security features such as authentication and authorization of the commands sent across SNMP, we didn't feel that it was a good alternative to 802.1x and Radius. But now that there's SNMP v2c and SNMP v3 that add these necessary security elements to the protocol itself, we're able to add that as an alternative to 802.1x for admission control in environments where you may not want to or be able to enable 802.1x and Radius on the switches. So that's our compatibility with firewalls and switches.
Great. Let's see. The next question is, sorry, we've got quite a few questions here. Is this meant to control access from just employee devices or also non-employees?
It's absolutely meant to extend to both employee and personal devices. So a BYOD device, you may want to onboard that in your environment and push down configurations such as a Wi-Fi configuration or a VPN configuration. You may want to push down a certificate or an email configuration. So we have the ability to onboard personal devices and to provide different levels of configuration for those personal devices, in addition to the full integration with corporate managed devices. Great.
Let's see. I'm looking for a way to control data access and guest control over Wi-Fi. Does this product have the ability to help with that?
Yes, we absolutely have the ability to integrate with leading wireless LAN controllers. So often a wireless LAN controller will offer a captive portal capability, and we have the ability to integrate with those WLCs in that captive portal to allow guest self-registration and then to authorize those guests onto a wireless network. And we can even control where they go in the network because most wireless vendors today offer ACLs that can apply as well as just a VLAN assignment within the SSID. So you can do both a VLAN assignment and you can also invoke ACLs to control what traffic the user sends once they are connected to the wireless.
Great. How many layers can apply policies simultaneously?
Let's see. So you have the ability to apply policy at layer 2 to determine whether they are allowed to connect to the network at all. And then you have the ability to apply policy at layer 3, and it's really layer 3 and 4, for where they can send traffic through the firewall enforcers. And with integration with the Juniper SRX firewalls in particular, we can also integrate the intrusion prevention components on the Juniper firewalls, so we can actually extend that integration up to layer 7. So I would say that in a standard environment, you can do layer 2 enforcement through any switch and wireless. You can do layer 3 and 4 enforcement through Juniper and Palo Alto Networks firewalls, and you can go all the way up to layer 7 enforcement with the Juniper firewall integration.
Great. Is there any way to know if a device is secure, as in at least having antivirus before they are allowed on your network? Even at least asking them yes or no, or what antivirus program are you on?
Totally. However, it does require having the Pulse client installed on the endpoint. So if you are able to install the Pulse client on the endpoint, the Pulse client can evaluate the endpoint state and communicate that state as part of the 802.1x authentication. At that point, you can do a compliance check on the endpoint, and before they're even allowed to make the 802.1x connection and get onto the network, you can make a compliance assessment. In that case, if the endpoint fails, you can choose to block them from the network entirely with a radius reject, but that's usually not a good solution because that doesn't give them any way to solve the problem. A better choice would be to push down a VLAN ID or a filter ID that would allow them onto the network, but with a limited access that would enable them to remediate whatever they failed. And you can check a broad range of endpoint state, ranging from, is there antivirus present on the endpoint? If so, which antivirus is it? Is the real-time protection enabled? Are the virus signatures up to date? Has a system scan been run in a certain amount of time? Is the firewall turned on? Is there anti-malware, anti-spyware? There are also custom checks that you can do to look for the presence or absence of a file, the presence or absence of a running process. You can look for ports that are open or closed on the endpoint. You can look for particular registry keys and see what they're set to. Then, by the way, that's a really cheap and easy way to do a managed endpoint check. So if you want to determine whether an endpoint is a corporate endpoint or not, the most secure, best way to do that is to set up an internal PKI and put corporate machine certificates on all the endpoints and check for the presence of those certificates, and ain't nobody got time for that. Unless you are a heavily regulated or highly secure environment, a full enterprise PKI just often isn't available. But you still want to know whether this device is an enterprise device or a personal device. So for a Windows endpoint, one good way to do that is do a registry check to see if it belongs to the domain. If it's joined to the domain, that's a pretty good chance that it's an enterprise device. On a Mac, it's a little more complicated because they don't join domain, but you could look for and place an Easter egg file somewhere or run a process that's unexpected. So what we see is people putting files in obscure locations and then doing a host check for the presence of that file to see whether the Mac is a corporate device or not. So you can absolutely check both before admission and for the duration of the session. You can check to see whether it has antivirus, check to see which antivirus, and you can even check to see whether the antivirus is up to date and all the way there.
Great. Let's see. Is this hardware-based, cloud, or VM?
So the Policy Secure appliance, you have multiple options for hardware and for VMs. We don't currently have a cloud-based Policy Secure server, but if you want a hardware appliance, we have hardware appliances that range from 500 users to 50,000 concurrent users. And if you want a virtual appliance, we have virtual appliance options on both VMware and KVM. Now, since you manage cloud, we do have a related cloud-based offering, and that is Pulse One. Pulse One is the centralized management solution that enables you to have visibility and configuration distribution across all of your policy servers, whether they are NAC policy servers, Pulse Policy Secure, or whether they're SSL VPN gateways of Pulse Connect Secure. Pulse One is a cloud-based software as a service solution that gives you centralized management, and we are also in 2016 going to be extending that to an on-premise centralized managed solution.
All right. How does Policy Secure handle BYOD?
That's another great question. With BYOD, the biggest challenge is deciding whether to allow it on the network in the first place. And the second challenge is provisioning it for the appropriate level of network access. So with BYOD, with the decision whether or not to allow it on the network, we have the option to integrate with MDM or with device classification solutions to, number one, identify it as a mobile device, and number two, check to see whether it's managed by an existing MDM solution. If there isn't MDM in the environment, then you may want to take advantage of another Pulse offering, which is Pulse Workspace, which is a BYOD container solution that segregates personal and corporate data independently on the device and allows full protection for data at rest and data in transit. Once you have the decision of whether to allow the device on the network, then the next question is, how do you configure it easily for network access? And for that, we have onboarding that can be applied both to Windows, Mac OS X desktop OSs, and it can also be applied to iOS and Android mobile OSs. This onboarding enables a user to enter credentials, identifying themselves with the device that they're onboarding. And then that device can be provisioned with the VPN client, with VPN connection information, with a wireless SSID configuration, with the certificates necessary to do zero-touch authentication to the VPN or to the wireless, and also even with email configuration settings. So the onboarding enables seamless, simple BYOD across both mobile and desktop OSs.
Great. Let's see. Sorry, questions keep changing on me. Which MDM third parties do you currently integrate with?
So today we integrate with MobileIron and AirWatch, and we have the ability to query those MDM solutions not only for whether the device is managed, but to actually gather particular properties like inventory, whitelists, whether it's only running authorized applications, whether it's compliant with whatever MDM security may be applied, etc.
Great. How does Pulse Policy Secure NAC solution differ from other NAC solutions available?
So the primary differentiator for us is the flexibility and the maturity of our solution. You have other NAC solutions, let's say from Cisco. Cisco has had, I think, 5 different NAC solutions over the past 10 years. So you started with the Cisco NAC framework using the ACS server. I think they might have been calling that one NAC. And then they bought Perfigo, so you had Cisco Clean Access. And those were 2 independent solutions at Layer 2 and Layer 3. Then they introduced Cisco ICE a few years ago. They were OEMing a profiling solution for a while, and then they introduced their own profiling into ICE. So with Cisco, their approach to NAC has changed several times over the past decade. On the other hand, Policy Secure has been evolving steadily in response to our customer needs and requirements for those 10 years. So we have a flexible, open solution that is very mature and very responsive to the real-world challenges in an enterprise. Another solution might be the Aruba ClearPass. And Aruba ClearPass is fantastic if all you need to do is guest and wireless access. But if you need an end-to-end solution that extends to on and off premise, if you need comprehensive compliance checks, if you need a solution that is equally strong wired as wireless, then Policy Secure probably is a better choice. So those are our main differences from the other NAC solutions. We offer the combination of open standards-based solution for ease of interoperability, the end-to-end solution, and a comprehensive policy that can be applied across on and off premise, across a variety of devices, across wired and wireless, across admission and deeper in the network, etc.
Fantastic. Can you elaborate more on the guest user features associated with Pulse Policy Secure?
Yes. So for guest access, the main challenge with guests is how do you get them on the network? And there's really two primary paths that you follow there. One would be a guest self-registration. And this is allowing the guest to connect to a portal, identify themselves, and then receive credentials over email or SMS or just directly, displayed on the screen. The self-registration solution is the simplest, but it's also not very secure because anybody can do it. So a step up in security would be a sponsored guest. And then the sponsored guest use case, you have the ability for a Policy Secure administrator to delegate one or more end users as guest access managers. So a guest access manager is an end user who logs into Policy Secure through a web page and has a screen that allows them to add sponsored guests, entering the guest's name, possibly putting conditions such as time of day, the duration that they're allowed to be a guest on the network, information you might want to capture from the guest like their employer, etc. This can be done either one at a time, or if you've got 100 people coming in for a conference, you can do a bulk upload via XML. So in either case, we have the ability to easily enable a guest on the network, either simply through self-registration or securely through employee sponsorship.
All right, fantastic. So we're pretty much out of time for questions, and we're pretty much out of questions as well. So thank you for that awesome presentation, Lisa. Do you have any final words for our audience?
I really appreciate everybody's time, and I would encourage you to come to the Pulse Secure website and check us out. We've got a lot of information from data sheets to solution briefs to even some case studies up there.
All right, fantastic. Thank you very much. I do want to remind everyone that if your question wasn't addressed live, somebody from Pulse Secure will be able to follow up with you. And if you had to step out or miss any part of today's presentation, you'll be getting an email in a few days with a link to view the webinar on demand. Special thanks to Pulse Secure for creating today's content and sponsoring this great event. And thanks to each and every one of you for tuning in today. We hope to see you back soon for another SpiceWorks Partner webinar. But until then, stay safe and keep it spicy.